I'm Brian, welcome to Autogefühl and welcome to Andalusia, home to sometimes eventually sun, sheep, and today the all-new Audi A1. Now, Thomas already had the chance to take a static look around this car, but today we're going to get to take it out and find out how it drives. We all know that the world of cars is moving very rapidly in the direction of the SUV, but that presents car designers with a very real problem. What do they do with their predecessor models? It's not as if people have stopped liking standard cars, but in design terms, it's a real challenge. If big is the new bold and beautiful, what do you do with cars when they're not big? Well, I think the A1 is a perfect example of exactly where that design language is going to. The car stays small, but that SUV styling has crossed over. Let's see what that looks like on the new A1. There are two really strong initial first impressions that you get from the new A1. The first is quite how important it's becoming to Audi to make sure there's synergy between their different offerings. What do I mean by that? Well, we pick up a lot of the styling cues in this car from cars that are far sportier and bigger in lots of other areas of their offering. And what's particularly interesting about that is obviously how that bigger, bolder design relates to smaller vehicles. Now, this is a massive hexagonal black grille for a car of this size. And whilst it looks very striking, you do have to ask the question, does this much size fit within a small vehicle? I wouldn't say I'm completely convinced, especially as if you take a little bit of a further look back, you can see an awful lot of radiator through this grille, and that's something a lot more in keeping or what we would expect from a sports car. This is, after all, still a small car, and I'm not quite sure if that bold styling is going to work for everyone. But that's my only criticism of the initial look at the new face of this car. This new angularity that we have, combined with the styling on the side and the bottom, and if you noticed it from Thomas's review, we have this call back to the quattro in the top of the bonnet, really does make for a very aggressive looking front. I really like this styling. I'm just not completely convinced that a small car is where it belongs. But it does make certain that everyone is aware, yes, okay, I bought an A1, but I am still a member of the Audi family. I still want everybody to know, yeah, I drive an Audi, and just because it's small, that's not something that I want to feel bad about. The A1 is based on the MQB A0 platform, and the reason that's important is it's the platform that's shared with the Volkswagen Polo and the Seat Ibiza. So it really does need to stand out and do something a little bit different and elevate it to the place that Audi wants it to sit. And I think we can really see how that design language has been utilized in the side of the front here. Yes, we have that increased, much more modern looking angularity, and that goes right throughout the design of the car. If you remember, the predecessor was a little bit on the rounded side, and that definitely suited a smaller car of its era. But as we move forwards more and more into the age of the SUV, I think we're looking for bigger, bolder design, and that's certainly delivered in the way that Audi have redesigned the face of this car. It's big, but it's very, very stylish. Look how much design there is going into this light. There's an awful lot of style happening here and an awful lot of brand differentiation to let you know, yup, I'm small, but I'm still an Audi. As we come through to the side of the car, we really start to get a sense of how this design is working out for the car. Now, this car is 4 meters and 3 or 13 feet and 2 inches in length. And this is the first surprise for me. Yes, it is slightly bigger than its predecessor, but look how much visual height they've managed to give the car. Now, a quick production detail I want to give you. Ordinarily, we work really hard to make sure that these cars are as clean as is humanly possible when we show them to you, so you can get a good sense of exactly how they present. But it's rained and rained some more in Andalusia, so for time we're a little bit pushed. So I do want to point out that the paintwork isn't usually with this Spanish road effect in the bottom third, but I think you can get the general idea. Now, this is a very nice place to talk about the new way that the colors interact. I have to be honest with you, the first time I saw this green, I wasn't completely convinced. And if you have a look at the color here on the new bespoke wheels, again, I thought, well, that's a little different. But the more that I've looked at it, the more I've come to like it. This car is making a new statement about the direction of the A1, and therefore it only makes sense that the color palette should change slightly to accept that as well. Classic Spanish traffic. So if you have a look at this contrast and at first you think, I don't know if it's for me, I would ask you, just wait a little bit. The first time you see anything that's a little new and a little different, often it's not the best thing you've ever seen. But the longer I've looked at this, the more it's grown on me. I do like the contrasting roof. I think that makes it look really nice and modern and stylish. And I can't believe how much visual height that they've packed into this design. The nice stylish angularity of the front has wrapped through into the side here and then comes right through into the back with this nice stylish top to the boot lid. That angularity is followed through into the rear. Let's take a look and see how that works out visually as well. The A1 now features a whopping 335 litre boot. That is a hugely impressive 65 litres bigger than the predecessor. So why do I mention that now? Well, I think that accounts for an awful lot of what we see in the rear styling here. This is clearly a much bigger rear than we're used to looking at. But as always with cars, you have to ask yourself, how am I going to feel about sitting behind this, looking at it? And I think it's really pleasing. It's not too big, but again, you are seeing echoes of the SUV line here. It's very prominent, it does sit very upright, and it's very proud for a smaller car. So I think there might be a little bit of adjustment required in terms of how you feel about the styling on the smaller vehicles. But overall, I think when you combine the angularity of these, sorry, slightly dirty rear lights and the wide swathe of this bumper at the base, and we have the 150 horsepower model. Why is that relevant? Well, on the 150, you don't get any fake exhaust back here. They're tucked right under out of the way. And I think that was a really good design decision on the part of Audi. Why? Well, if you go to the 200 horsepower model, which Thomas has shown you in the static review, you can see those exhausts. They're real. It doesn't wind you up the wrong way. But sometimes on smaller cars, when you see fake exhaust ports on the back, you think, come on, who are you kidding? So I think it's a nice idea to say, yeah, you know, it isn't a sports car. It might be stylish, it might be sporty looking, but it's not a sports car. And that's just a nice visual reference, kind of a reminder. Let's take a look at that new larger boot and see what it delivers. Well, you can see this is my standard flight case that's fitted sideways on, and that's pretty nice for a small car. You can see that I've actually got plenty of room back here. The seats fold down in a somewhat traditional 60-40. And just for fun, let's see how accessible that is from back here. Okay, that's actually pretty easy. So if I want to get into the back, and we've got things on that rear seat at the moment, so I can't fold it flat. But if I want to get into the back and load something straight through, that's going to be a pretty straightforward affair. And I can tell you that with those seats folded down, you now have a load space of over 1,000 litres in the rear. And I'm pretty sure that's big enough for most things you could want to put in here. This as well, there's a little bit of bonus storage back here. If we're going to have a spare tyre, that sits in the well beneath, but we also have a little bit of room for spare tools as well. Let's take a look under the bonnet and find out what's powering the new A1. Well, sadly, no gas struts to be found here, just a regular old pole to hold it up. But that's a nice, pretty compact looking engine. Now, we have a choice of 4 engines available to us. We've got a 1 litre engine with 3 cylinders, and that's available in 2 sizes. That's 95 or 116 horsepower. This one that we're looking at is a 1.5 litre 4-cylinder. That's 150 horsepower. And we can have at the top of the line 2 litres, 4 cylinders, 200 horsepower. And the interesting thing about 2 of those engines is that the top one, the 200 horsepower, comes with a wet clutch. Now, if you're going to ask me to explain that to you technically, I think there might be a little bit more time than we have, and maybe also a little bit more technical detail than I have currently. But I can tell you that it helps the engine produce a little bit more power, a little bit more efficiently. If you want to go with the 150, you can have that with cylinder on demand technology, and that means you can only use 2 cylinders at a time. That makes the engine a lot more efficient to use. My pick from the bunch? Well, I don't think this is a sports car, so I would say that the 200 horsepower may be somewhat overkill for the standard A1 for the regular user. Conversely, if the most important thing to you is going to be economy and fuel usage, the 3 cylinders is a good pick. I like all-rounders, so I'm going to go with exactly what we have here, and that's the 150 horsepower. But importantly, let's find out what it delivers when it's driving. Let's take a look inside and see what's changed. Well, I'm going to start with the key. And I have to say I'm a little disappointed. There's nothing wrong with this key, it's very standard affair. But given how much of a dramatic change has taken place aesthetically with the A1, I think I would have liked it if something just a little bit bolder had happened with the key. That's not so important. Let's take a look inside and see what's happening. All right, so I am 5'10" or 178 centimeters, and the first thing to mention is I have plenty of headroom, and that's really nice. The seats, and here we can see we have fabric seating, are really nice and comfortable. Now, the roads around Andalusia, especially once you get up into the hills, are not terribly forgiving. So we've had a chance to check out 2 things in a lot of detail. The one is the suspension, obviously also with the steering. But the quality of the seat comes in as an important afterthought, and I have to tell you, they're really good. Oftentimes with suspension on smaller cars, you're really faced with a difficult dilemma. Do you want it to be direct and sporty, or do you want to be a little more comfortable and a little bit more spongy? And I'm pleased to say with the suspension, we've gone for aggressive and sporty, but it's still supportive. But what that does mean is you do tend to get a little bit of movement when you're on these smaller country roads with lots of lumps and bumps in, and the seats do a really good supportive job of making sure that you're kept nice and secure without being held too tight and giving you some really great support. So, well done Audi on the seats. Let's talk about the interior design. If you're a fan of angularity, you're going to be very happy sitting in this cockpit. There are angles everywhere. Now, as Thomas mentioned in the static review, one of the slight drawbacks of going with modular platforms is that you are going to be keeping some of the aspects that maybe you might have liked to have changed from the other cars within the group. There is plenty of hard plastic in here, but you know what? It's a small car. I'm really not that bothered by it. I like the way that Audi have added a lot of styling detail to lift up the feeling of quality that you get from the car. Am I in love with the angularity and the detailing of the colour, enhanced as it is by this ambient lighting? Well, I have to give credit where it's due, and I think it does have a very individual and unique feeling of styling. And that's really important in a car like this, which continues on to the display. There is an awful lot of brand referencing happening within the cockpit. I can see echoes of so many others of Audi cars in this car. And that makes me feel happy, I have to be honest, because a lot of customers tend to find they don't just own one vehicle from a group, they buy a couple of different ones, and it makes them feel much more comfortable when they can switch between them, and they don't feel they're being compromised in terms of style and quality of finish. And everything in here is nicely put together. Would I describe it as premium? For a small car, yes. Overall, no, of course not. Come on, it's the smallest Audi in the group. You're not going to expect to have everything. But it is contemporary and fresh, and as I said, if you're a fan of angles, you're going to be right at home. Me, I like things a little bit simpler, but that's just my taste. As far as the layout of the controls is concerned, well, that is extremely intuitive. Of course, we'll wait to driving to find out exactly how easy these are to operate, but they work very well visually, they don't clutter anything up, and they work very nicely in keeping with the design of these 2 displays. Now, if I can ask Martin to pan the camera around a little bit, we're going to switch the system on so you can see how it boots up. Now, what you're looking at are the largest options for the displays, and great. I thought we weren't going to beep there for a minute. I'm going to say something that I don't usually say with the displays in cars. Oftentimes I will recommend that customers go with the smaller displays because it does cost a lot more money to go bigger. On this car, I'm going to recommend that you do go bigger. And the reason isn't because the smaller system won't deliver what you're looking for. The reason is because this is a premium small car. Without question, you're going to be paying more for an A1 than you would for a similar car from a different brand. So I really think that you're going to want that resonating visually and practically every time you use the car. You're just not going to want to sit in here and be niggled every time that you saved a little bit of money by going with a cheaper option. So I think if you can afford to spring for the car in the first place, spend that little bit more and have this nice driver's experience. Everything about the driver's experience has been made to make you feel that you are in a larger car. You have a lot more functionality than you expect standardly from a smaller car, and the way that the features all combine makes you feel, yeah, you know what, I am in a premium product, and that's a nice feeling. Whilst at the same time we make the best use of hard materials, so it is still very easy to keep clean. Coming further down, we have an inductive charging pad in the center. We have 2 USB charging points, a nice USB-C, and obviously a standard USB as well. That's a nice way to link both the present and the past. Coming a little bit further back, I'm more than a little bit intrigued always by what car designers choose to do with center consoles. This car manufacturer have provided us with the exact perfectly sized water bottle to go into their containers. I don't think you're going to fit anything a lot bigger than that in here, but don't worry because the door pockets are actually quite generous, and we can fit, I have a 1 litre water bottle and it fits in there with total ease. So you're pretty well covered for drinks, but this I find a little bit intriguing. I think it's possible we have here water, and this is the driver's emergency espresso. What do you think? Now, a little bit further back, we have the storage, and okay, it's a small car, so what would you expect? There really is not very much of any room to keep anything beyond a little change in here. It won't take another mobile phone, and it won't take something the size of a pen. So, critically, can we fit any of that stuff into the glove compartment? Let's take a look. Actually, that's not bad. I could have used something a little bit less plastic, but I do appreciate the amount of space that's there. As well as the driver's manual, I still have some extra room for bits and pieces that I might want to store. Let's take a look in the back and see what's happening. Well, if you've seen Thomas's static review, you'll already know where the extra boot space came from, and that is the rear passenger experience. But I do have to point out, Thomas is a fairly tall guy. Now, both Martin and myself, we're short guys. Short guys are better, aren't they, Martin? What do you think?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So that's why when we sit back here, look at the space we have. Now, it's only important to point out I have absurdly short legs. This seat is set for me. Martin, who's about my height but has normal human being legs, this seat is set for him. So if we have a look down here, we can get a direct cross-reference so you can see exactly how much space I have. So realistically, you know what? If you want to put your friends in here to run into town, you're going to be absolutely fine with that. But adults sitting back here for long journeys, as in keeping with every other small car I can think of, are not going to be spectacularly comfortable. We do have some nice child support anchors back here, so we can, of course, fit those all-important car seats. And what's really interesting about this car is that the front seat has also those anchor points. Now, that's a big deal for a small car. Look, we can see the top tether latch in the base of the seat down here. That is a huge deal for a small car, and it solves something that has bothered parents forever, which is, okay, great, I have 3 children. I know you say I can fit 3 kids across the back. Trust me, you can't with car seats. Here we then have 3 safe, secure points to locate children. In a small car, that is a very big deal. Now, as far as the adult riding experience, if you look at my head, in keeping with my freakishly short legs, I also have a bizarrely large torso, and that's why even at my short height, you can see I don't have masses of headspace, but I have to tell you, I'm actually really pretty comfortable back here. So in contrast to Thomas, sorry Thomas, your fault for being so tall, I think I'd be pretty great back here for a decent length of time. And I am really happy about one detail in particular. This is the water bottle I was mentioning from earlier. It doesn't only go in the front door pockets, but it completely comfortably fits in the back. And as a rear seat passenger, you will know that is really nice for longer journeys. Only thing we're missing back here is any kind of charging points. Again, this fabric looks hard wearing and durable. So yes, you're going to need to do a little bit of cleaning and maintenance if you have the children back here after football games, but I think it's going to live up to that wear and tear. Perfectly comfortable. Now, the other thing we're going to need to see is, can we access the rear easily while we're in it? Look at that. Really straightforward, really nice, and then we can take full advantage of all of that lovely extra boot space. So now it's time for us to find out exactly how the new A1 drives. We are sitting in the 150 horsepower mid-tier engine. That's a 1.5 litre four-cylinder producing 250 newton meters of torque. All of that adds up to a 0 to 100 or 62 speed of 7.7 seconds, which is perfectly respectable. Now, let's just get this car in gear and off we go. We have the S-tronic gearbox. That's going to give us a 7-speed DSG. And you can have the mid-engine in either this or the manual. But I have to tell you, the S-tronic is extremely nice to drive. So if you're comfortable with it, I would absolutely recommend that you go with that. So first things first, what does the car express to you when you turn it on? Well, firstly, it's an Audi. Secondly, it's a small car. So you're not going to get thrills of excitement running up your spine when you switch this car and pull it into life. But I can tell you that it sounds really nice. Now, if efficiency is your thing, okay, I'm not going to be able to talk you out of the 3-cylinder. But I like things that do the best of all worlds, so I'm very happy with this 150 horsepower engine. We are in the hills in Andalusia, and I can tell you that we have some fantastically windy roads here, which are going to really give us a chance to try out this steering and the uprated suspension. We have the standard here. It's going to give us a really good chance to see what this car would normally deliver. Now, if you want to go top of the line and you can have all the whistles and bells, of course, Audi is famous for having a million different options you can put with your car. But their standard packages are usually very nicely refined, and so generally, especially when you're going with the smaller models, I don't feel the need to load them up that much. And I'm hoping that this isn't going to be any exception. Let's give it a little bit of encouragement and see how it handles. Well, the first thing to mention is, of course, that being a small car, you are going to get a little bit more movement on the road than you would expect with a larger, heavier car. That said, it's very crisp and nippy, and something that is very pleasing is the tightness of that steering. It really is very, very crisp indeed. The braking works very nicely in conjunction to give you poise and accuracy. Despite the fact that it is a small car and sometimes when you drive them the brakes are a little bit too insistent, there's a really nice range of action on that braking pedal, so you can get exactly the performance you're looking for. Put that together with the engine and the delivery of speed, and we're talking about that 0 to 100 time of 7.7 seconds. To be perfectly honest with you, for a car of this size and profile, I have more than enough driving and opportunity to enjoy the agileness of a small vehicle. I don't need more power, and honestly, I don't need better handling either. I have more than enough here, and these back roads in the hills are absolutely perfect to try it out. Now, obviously, we're all going to want to spend all of our free time driving through the foothills here, but realistically, is this what this car is going to be used for most? No, I suspect this is. Driving through towns, and here in one of the smaller villages, we are absolutely perfectly placed to see how this small car handles when you put it in everyday usage. well, that light, crisp steering is still very responsive. And because we have different drive select modes, we can make sure that we're getting the best out of the environment. We don't need sporty suspension here, and we certainly don't need to be accelerating fast or braking quickly. What we do need is for those assistance systems to be making sure that they're helping us get the most out of our driving experience. And it's a very good place to talk about the driving experience of this car. Now, the nice thing about driving an A1 is that you don't get glared at when you are driving around town, and that is particularly nice because some of the cars we take out at Autogefühl, I would say local residents are not so excited for us to be driving them through, but this is a perfect town car. The driving position is great. Again, I'm surprised at just how high up I sit. I have really great all-round visibility. This B-pillar isn't sucking up my entire ability to see everything that's happening here, and I can cruise through town fully feeling that I'm not being dwarfed by larger vehicles, but that at the same time I can fit through these ridiculously narrow streets without upsetting any of the residents. Now, you might think all of that's obvious, but honestly, some small cars are a lot larger than you might like. Some large cars are just not ideal for driving through towns. So I think you have a very nice compromise here in that you have a car that's going to be fast and fun when you're taking it out on the backcountry roads. But for day-to-day use, it's perfectly polite, poised, and really easy to maneuver. Now for me, a part of that driving experience when you get into town and you're using the car more for day-to-day use is definitely delivered by this infotainment system. And that's a good time to ask yourself just how much of this is delivering me what I want and how much is distracting. Well, the digital cockpit display is really good at being able to provide you only with what you need and not overwhelming you. Even though the default setting on the navigation is to use Google's Maps, which are a little bit more to look at than, say, the standard just navigation field, the way that the screen is high definition and also uses the reflective quality of the light means that you are not put off by that at all. A lot of words, in short, it means you're not bothered by anything outside of your own driving experience. The rear view camera works well. It's a great car to take around town, but I don't think that will be a big surprise to anyone. Let's just have a brief chat about the infotainment system. All of the controls are baked into the steering wheel, and, you know, they work well. Are they exactly what I would like? Well, I do have a couple of bugbears. They're only small ones, but I think they're worth mentioning. The first is that when I am using that navigation system, it will only give me the speed limit on the central display, not the driver display. And of course, in this car, we do not have a head-up display. What that means, or what that amounts to, is that you do experience just a little bit of a distraction when you're visually switching between your driver display for the speed you're driving to your navigation for the speed that you should be driving. I think that's something that could have been tweaked with the software. Maybe it will be addressed with a later update. I'm not sure. As far as the display itself goes, you do have the option, and it's quite intuitive, to scroll between different modes that you can look at here. There aren't the huge ranges of abilities to tweak your display as there are in the larger Audis. I can push this button here, which minimizes my speed and my rev counter, which allows me to get more information in the middle. Now, if you like to have that navigation information big on the driver's display as well as the infotainment system, that will allow you to do that. However, it will not, I know what you're thinking, it will not mean that you get that speed limit now in your driver's display. Again, I think they missed a little trick there that they could have added in. It would be nice, because sometimes it is actually nice to switch off your central infotainment system and only have your driver's display. And if you rely on that speed limit as much as I do, especially if you're driving in unfamiliar places, it is information that you really want to have. Now, other than that, you can have all the standard things you would expect, including, of course, our fantastic friend, the fuel efficiency reader. Now, because this car is very new, we don't yet have an official number for it, but we can tell you what we have found by driving around in it so far. And I always think it's interesting to do this while driving, because it does tell you how easy this information is to access. Now, I think that they have had this car switched on in order to give it a little bit more heat before we got to it, because the number I'm currently showing for this car is 8.3 litres. And I know that from driving yesterday, Martin, I want to say that we got 6.7. We got 6.7 litres. And we both felt that that was a fair representation of real world usage. We weren't pushing the car like crazy, but we were giving it a reasonable drive, and we had a good mixed terrain on which to come up with that number. So, it's very early stages. It's only based on one driving session, but I would say the fuel efficiency for this mid-size engine is really very acceptable. It's a nice balance between power and economy. Again, that's why it's my choice. So, as far as the digital infotainment system stuff goes, acres of choices within your infotainment system. I don't know how much time you're going to spend digging into all of that, but you can of course talk to the system, and that makes life a lot easier. Clearly, Android Auto and Apple CarPlay make things even easier still if you like to use your phone on the go. I made a couple of phone calls yesterday while driving, hands-free, speaking to the system to see how easy it was, and it was a very nice, straightforward, simple integration. I think that's probably enough about the infotainment system. It certainly isn't the best one I've ever seen, but at this price point and in this car, again, if you go with those larger screens, I think you're going to be very happy with the experience. So, that about does it for town driving. I don't think I'm surprising anyone there. It performs really nicely, exactly as you would want. How about on the highway? What happens when you put a little bit more tarmac under the wheels of this car and see how it behaves? Well, first of all, I want to have a look at the acceleration and see just how close to those 7.7 seconds I can get in standard real-world usage. Okay, so we have some open road. Let's put our foot down. And there we have 100. I think you would have to agree that really is more than enough acceleration for everyday usage. This is not a sports car. You're not going to want to use it to tear around streets. But once you get it on those back roads, that acceleration really does come into life. And a lot of that is because of the characteristic of the handling of this car. Every time you take a bend at any kind of speed, you're reminded of two things. First of all, the weight and the precision of the steering is so well delivered. It really is the perfect compromise between the size of car and the sportiness of the driving that you want to bring about in terms of how it feels. The other thing that's really nicely delivered here is the suspension and the chassis handling. The torsional stiffness is great, so you have just enough sporty feeling without too much compromise on your ride comfort. Now, that said, as I pointed out earlier, the roads around here are not spectacular, and once you increase the speed even a little over slow on the back roads, you do feel those bumps and scrapes. But let's not forget, this car is driving with the largest available wheels, and that does give you a slightly less comfortable ride, although a slightly more enhancement on the sporty quality, I would say. So, all in all, as a total package, I think Audi have really nailed the balance between sportiness and comfort. Martin's in the back, and it's the first time we've had the opportunity to see how somebody's found that experience. How's the comfort degree back there, Martin?
Good. Very good.
Martin says good, and he isn't throwing things to the back of my head, so I think we can take that as a sign that it is as comfortable as we thought it might be. And Thomas, you are clearly just too tall. So to sum up the driving experience of the new A1, well, I'm going to stick with my initial thought that the mid-size engine is really the one to go for. I don't see the point in taking this car into a larger, more dynamic mode, unless, of course, you just have to have the most power available. I really like the balancing here, and that's the way that I would assess the entire driving experience of this car. The compromise between size, sportiness, and comfort has really been hit right on the head. Very happy with the way the digital information is conveyed to me. I think the controls for that could be slightly more intuitive. It's always a toss-up, for example, when you look at menu design on the driver's display as to whether you would roll through menus. I prefer that, or stop at the top and have to go back to the bottom. That's how this system works. Some people prefer that. Personal choice, even better still, might be to allow you to make that decision for yourself. Some of these menus are a little bit clunky to navigate, and you can't always identify exactly the information you want exactly when you want it. I think that the speed limit is a really good example of that. If anything, you could say the reason that I'm noticing that speed limit so very much is that the ride is so comfortable. Here in Spain on the roads, you can find yourself going too fast very easily. This car is so comfortable and so nippy, obviously not like a Spanish van, but still, that you do want to have that information available to you to keep your driving license and everybody else safe. So, 2 thumbs up, Audi. I think you really nailed the drive on this small car. Plenty of interior space, classic Audi driving feeling even in their smallest vehicle, and all around comfort. So, what do we think that does to the car as an overall package? So what do we think about the A1 in sun? Well, okay guys, first of all, we're gonna have to make some apologies to Audi because of time constraints and the weather here in Andalusia. We have not had the time to do quite the usual job of cleaning of the car that we would have liked. But this does at least give you an idea that we really have driven this car to make sure that we have a good sense of what it can deliver. Now, in considering the A1 in some of its parts, I think the best analogy I can give you is round here at the side. If you take a look at this wheel housing, Martin's just gonna come around and have a look here. We have, as I already said, the largest wheels on this car. These are 18 inches and these are special wheels. And if you look through at these wheels to the brake caliper, everything here looks exactly as it should do. It's big, bold, aggressive, very stylish, nice and sporty. If we come through to the back, you see something a little different. Now, the reason that this is so significant to me is it's a perfect visual metaphor for this car. What I mean by that is that if you get the lower version of this car with a smaller engine, you will find drum brakes at the rear. Now, that isn't extraordinary, that's very standard for a small car. Because we have the slightly more powerful model and slightly more upgraded, we have discs at the rear, but they're smaller discs than the front. That's because they simply aren't needed with the weight of the car. But if you look at this as a visual statement, you see exactly what I'm talking about. Here we have the modern era, big, bold, sporty, aggressive. Here we have the small car reality. And that really sums up the A1 for me. Yes, the styling had to evolve and change. The world is without question going towards SUV, and the small car, in order to keep its relevance and its place in the market, really has to do something aggressive to stand out. But at its heart, it's still always going to be a small car. So how do you deliver a car that's giving everyone what they want from that visual expectation, but also the very qualities that they bought a small car for in the first place? That's going to mean compromises. And for me, what I am so excited about with the A1 is that it's delivered so well on so many different compromise areas. Yes, it looks bigger, bolder, more aggressive. I think overall it works. There are places for me, like with that front grille, where you think, come on, is this overkill just a little bit? It might be for some people, but I suspect the market's going to love it. The overall package with the drive and the quality of the interior, excellent. The infotainment system, well, it's a good enough match to its more expensive brothers to give you everything you can want and make you feel very good about the car. So, impressive is that this is the smallest model, but still it's an Audi through and through. Now that's the good, and you absolutely know it when you drive it. What's the less good? Well, we don't have the pricing available for it yet, but I'm pretty sure you all know what I'm going to say next. It's not going to be cheap. That in itself is not a problem. I don't believe Audi has ever been a brand which people buy in order to save money. They buy it for the driving experience. And I'm very happy to tell you that the A1 delivers that in spades. Will it do it at a price point that you consider to be acceptable? Well, for that, we're just going to have to wait and find out. I hope you've enjoyed this as much as we have making it. If you have any comments or questions, please pop them below. Please subscribe, and we hope we'll see you again soon.